So now you've seen the best of bow fronts and the most ordinary of bow fronts. Nothing wrong with either of them, perfectly acceptable, and the names of Sheraton and Hepplewhite just roll off the tongue associated with this period. And all would have been well had the Prince of Wales got on with his father, dear Farmer George. But he didn't. So in 1784, when the Prince was 21, he demanded and got Carlton House as his London residence. This was designed and decorated by the new and up-and-coming architect Henry Holland. Fabulous young man, but totally outrageous, which of course suited the Prince of Wales. Anything that annoyed his father was good news.
Perfect. Okay.
And we had furniture the like of which we'd never seen before. And this is what we call high-style Regency. Now, from 1784 till 1830, there was another band of design over and above this, okay, which was for the exclusive. This was for the wealthy, for the cognoscenti, the young, the really rich and outrageous. Nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. And we call it, first of all, we call it sort of early Regency, then high-style Regency, and then late Regency. Because the English Regency politically was only between 1811 and 1820. But when you say Regency furniture, it can be anywhere between 1784 and 1830. Okay? And it was really wild. It looked like this. Here's a great example in Burghley House. This, look, you've heard of a break front bookcase. That's ridiculous. It's broken all over the place, all the shapes going everywhere. Classical ties, and you'll notice the surface, the strange colour, because at this time it was more fashionable to have a cheap timber, pine or lime, painted to look like rosewood, than the real rosewood.
Really?
Extraordinary, yes. And lots of gilding, lots of painting.
Proper statement piece, isn't it, really?
Yes. And then we have all sorts of classical motifs coming in, rather like we'd had classical, we'd have sort of formula motifs in the 1720s of real things, trees and grottos and stuff. We had them again, but formalised, palm trees.
Wow.
And there is a mirror, again, at Burghley House. And these were pier mirrors.
High Regency, would you say this?
High-style Regency.
Okay.
High-style Regency. Really exotic. And here, the work or the designs of a man called Thomas Hope. Thomas Hope, very influential. He produced a book in 1807 called Designs for His Household Taste. And this is the sort of thing that it showed. And we can trace these things to these design books, and I'll show you in a moment. Very, very important part of the period were publications showing these. Thomas Hope, actually, was a very wealthy banker, very skilled draftsman. But he went on the grand tour, and you know, we talk about a 2-year break or a year out, don't we, these days? He went for 7 years on the grand tour.
Wow.
And obviously, as a highly educated man, came back to London and furnished 2 houses, one in the country, one in London, full of furniture like this.
Heavily
Thomas
influenced
Hope,
by the classical.
Thomas Hope, very important, a much used name. There, as can you imagine coming down in the morning and saying, "Darling, look what I bought." Oh, what is that?
Nothing, and no one had ever seen anything like this before.
Now, in the back of that chair, you'll see those little palmettes, sort of like honeysuckles.
Yeah.
Right. That will give you a clue to high-style Regency on any piece of furniture. Very, very important. The stars and studs, of course, represent the canoes that they discovered in Egypt. So we're after 1810 now, that sort of period. But I mean, what a wonderful thing to have. But
it's in your face. I mean, it's properly in your face.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's a real statement. And interesting canework comes back from the 1780s, revival of cane after 100 years, 1680, 1780, 1810. It's just a wonderful chair. Love it. Ebonized and gilded. Super thing. Look at that. That is a settee or sofa, the back of which looks rather like a chariot, doesn't it?
Yes.
See? And here again, the honeysuckle. See these motifs?
Yeah.
These big scrolls. And all the moulding is in square section, not rounded. So these are all sort of square section mouldings. And then the acanthus leaf feet. And
so it's Thomas Hope influence on this?
Very much so.
Okay.
Thomas Hope and a man called George Smith. And this is where we start getting designs from. Incidentally,
people would know him now, sort of sofas.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. Now, do you remember we were looking in the first talk, about the importance of having a slot across a frame to show where the seat had been either changed or altered?
Yep.
Right. I bought this for a huge amount of money in Christie's many, many years ago. and took it back. And my father said, that's been cut down, you know. I said, how do you know? He said, well, the proportions are wrong. Have you looked underneath? I said, no, I didn't need to. And you know that feeling when you know you've been stupid? Well, look, on the end rail, do you see those two little notches?
Yep.
Do you see one on the side rail?
Oh,
no.
Okay.
So it had been cut and shut. So there.
Why would they have done that, though?
Well, it was too long for somebody. They just thought, that's too long, George. Cut it down. All right, dear. Whatever you say.
Fair enough.
Reupholster it. But this
Beautiful,
is fantastic.
the wings.
I had it
everything.
for some time. I wish I'd still got it.
Stunning.
And that comes back, or brings me to the next stage, where we had tables were specially made for the first time in the change of climate that we had, when women could wear the Empire line, little thin dresses. They could recline upon a sofa like that. For the first time, you couldn't recline in a hoop dress. It all go up in the air. I mean, it's gone dark, sort of thing. But you could, if you were wearing a Napoleonic dress, you could recline. And the first sofa tables were made to pull up to the side or over the sofa. But it wobbled. It was unstable. So they put a bar across, which of course made it useless for pulling over the sofa. But that proportion of a long rectangular top, two short leaves, remained popular. And by the 1815 period, it had got a centre column, but it remained to be known as a sofa table. So no bar will be 1785, 1790. The first early bar, 1790 to 1800, and then the heavier, the more cumbersome, and after 1810, the centre column like that. Okay. Now this actually is a swivel top card table. That's quite nice. Two or three things to look at here. You see this leaf on the knee? Mm-hmm. That is a typical post-1815 feature. You don't really see that before 1810, 1815 at the earliest. Okay. And then you have these nice sort of lion's paw casters, again, after 1810. And generally, it's just a very attractive table, but it's typical. It won't be before 1810. Now, the important thing about this period is we had the design book. I want to show you a couple of those. First of all, that is a chair. Look at that for a design. That's a chair by by Henry Holland.
Henry Holland. That's a stunning chair.
Look at the
lines
dynamism of that. Is that phenomenal? Well, I don't have any...
it's an architect's dream, that one, isn't it?
Absolutely. But logistic, a nightmare, because anybody leaning back in that.
Yep.
But they didn't. And of course, they all sat up properly. They didn't sort of flop down like they did in the 1750s. They sat up. Now,
so a beautiful but uncomfortable chair.
Yeah, but beautiful. I'm going to show you. This is a book. This is George Smith's 1827 book. And I'll show you some of these patterns that they use. He would show you how to draw. But do you see this design? That's absolutely typical of the sofa. Okay?
Oh, wow, it's gone some massive detail
there. Yeah. Now, I've marked this. Well, I put some bits of paper in here, a bit untidy, but there's so much to look at. And I want you to go to, say, that one. There, you see?
The four-poster bed.
Yeah. Now, typical 1820s. Now, you could say Victorian, but this was the beginning of the Victorian period. This was the foundations of a lot of Victorian designs. Okay? And just a couple more, because there are some more. Now, look, you see, there's a little Davenport and a little table. Now, you can recognise that. I mean, you must have had them in your sale rooms. Labelled as Victorian. 1827 was when they were first seen. So we had publications. We had Ackerman's repository of Regency designs. We had the Brighton Pavilion. All of these reflected and give us an indication of when these things were first designed and first published. So that's why I keep saying you can't have this before, because a drawing had to be produced and published before anyone could make it. So this is the period when we can look at that chair, and now you can say, anybody can say, well, that's Henry Holland.
Yep.
It can't be before.
Yep.
Because it simply wasn't done.
Done. Yep.
Okay. Now, the other thing that came in 1815 was the use of, again, marquetry, but a different type of marquetry, which was boule work. Now, André Charles Boule, 1720s, France and or Germany, depending on how you spell it, introduced a method of putting brass and rosewood or tortoiseshell in the first period, as a type of marquetry decoration.
Okay, so brass with
tortoiseshell. Then in 1850, that went out of fashion. We didn't like it very much in England anyway, and it went out of fashion and was revived in the 1815 period after a man called Louis Gagneur opened a workshop in London, because we were at peace with France. So they all came over and started making furniture for us in the style that we loved. And tortoiseshell is not tortoiseshell, it's turtleshell, really. And it was cut like this. And somebody said, well, how do you flatten it? Well, of course, you warm it. You remember the old 78 records, and they used to put them in boiling water and make them into fruit bowls. You're probably too young. We used to. Big old records were wonderful.
Betamax, I remember as well, slightly, yeah. But that was when I was very young. But yeah.
Anyway, you did exactly the same. So you can flatten a turtle shell and then you can slice it in exactly the same way as before. And two colours were popular. One was red tortoiseshell, which you get by simply putting red underneath it.
That's what I'm used to seeing, is mainly the red tortoiseshells, what you see a lot of.
And yellow tortoiseshell, do you want to show that?
Yep.
One yellow tortoiseshell simply by putting white underneath it. And then you'd cut that, and you'd have your two patterns, as this is. And there would be a pair. There was boule and contre boule. And one would have the brass background and the tortoiseshell pattern. And of course the other one, both being expensive materials, nothing was wasted. You'd have boule and contre boule. So you'd have positive and negative. One with the brass background, tortoiseshell pattern, tortoiseshell background, brass pattern. After 1815.
After 1815.
And by the 1830s, we were using new material instead of tortoiseshell, a sort of
it's amazing how they come up with just absolutely stunning.
And of course, the early 18th century pieces are now hugely expensive and vastly expensive. But the 19th century pieces are still buyable and very attractive. So now where were we? Let's have a look. So have I lost you? Are you keeping up?
I'm completely with you. I'm just still enjoying the tortoiseshell at the moment.
Okay, fine. There it is in practice, the inlay of brass with, that's rather a good one actually. Gosh, I'd forgotten how lovely that is.
Where are these slides from?
These are my own pieces, yes, from when I was a boy. This I must have had 30 years ago.
Beautiful.
When my father, I'd take that back and say, what on earth are you doing? Regency furniture wasn't considered antique in those days. Curiously enough, I just had a wonderful settee, and I'd forgotten that this was some of the original material, and we're still using it today. But these are typical not André Charles Boule work done by Louis Gagneur. So again, with these great sweeps that you've seen in the designs, George Smith. Not his first book. It will have to be his second book because of the brass inlay. Okay. So all these things sort of go together to give you a little picture of when it can be, not before. Then, of course, the sabre leg. After the death of Nelson in 1805, anything that could be connected with naval exploits was marketed. Now, this curved sabre leg is actually from the Klipsos chair, the Greek chair, which was fashionable from 1784 to 1790, again, with as we've seen with the chair just looked at, with Henry Holland. And it was exclusive, and nobody liked it. When Nelson died, somebody said, let's call it a sabre leg. Oh, that's a good idea. And they marketed sabre leg chairs.
And then they came into fashion.
And flooded the market.
Wow.
And here you have two other little features. See the little rope twist?
Yep.
Well, that's from a cable on a ship.
Okay.
And then two little dominoes in the back. cannonball. Sometimes you see proper spheres as cannonballs, sometimes you see them as discs. After 1805, after the death of Nelson. And black inlay instead
This went on for what, 20 years?
Oh, 20 years, sure. Getting heavier and heavier.
Yes.
And black inlay instead of white inlay after 1805, another guide. Okay? See, heavier and heavier and heavier.
Yeah. Going to the Victorian.
Absolutely. Well, you say Victorian, but this type of decoration, first drawn and published by George Smith, 1827. So never dismiss them automatically as Victorian. You have to take other things into account.
Influences on it, yeah.
Sure. No
little lappets on the top.
Yes. This is a crozier arm. Again, a new but very ancient design.
Serious
Great
workmanship.
fun, aren't they? And here you can see designs from George Smith. Again, George Smith, I keep repeating it, but he was so important, so influential. Again, more little designs that you'll see. Any one of those on a piece of furniture, however small, just a minor feature will give you that clue. Very important, these design books at the time. Okay. And look here.
That's how Chippendale got famous, isn't it? Really?
Absolutely.
Because he published his book. He was only the first person to publish furniture designs, and then everyone copied them. And
that's right.
Chippendale,
that's right. Well, he was the first to market. He was just better at marketing. Matthias Locke had published drawings, but nobody thought of actually selling them, marketing themselves, as this man did. George Smith, he claimed he was cabinet maker to the king. But
made him
also
a chair.
Also funeral arrangements. They do anything in those days.
Of course.
But look here, look at these designs, 1827, and here, that's how we can date that. And here you see again honeysuckle, but a late version, thick legs, not thin ones, and it's always
sabre legs again at the back.
Yes, it's useful to remember that in 1820, when the Prince Regent became king, he started to lose some of his youthful looks, and he got fatter. So did the furniture.
So he needed to have furniture that would settle him, and he changed his design.
Big legs.
Simple as that. Simple as that.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. And here is the 19th century version of a Boule table. So two things. How do you know this isn't a priceless one from 1720? But a not so priceless one from 1830 or 40 or 50, because it was popular for 30, 40 years. Well, first of all, it's a swivel top.
The swivel tops were later.
Yeah, swivel top and opens up on the standard frame. Prior to that, the back legs opened on hinges.
So if they're back legs, then it would be a 1810 per 4.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Swivel top 1830. Great tip for the viewers.
And the other thing is, of course, you see this sort of bubbling effect here, sort of crinkling.
Yeah.
Well, that's where the fabrication of tortoiseshell has given way to the temperature changes, and it started to bubble up. So when you see that,
because you're talking about the heat wave, weren't you?
Yeah, and general heating in houses then, because we started to get proper central heating in most people's houses, and stoves, and it affected these sort of things. This is a sort of composition material. It looked fine, and it was never meant to last. You know, nobody thought it would be.
Because when that was made, that would have just sung, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It would just,
wonderful.
Because now it looks a little bit tired around there, although it's a beautiful piece of furniture, don't get me wrong.
That's a nice way of putting it. I think it looks pretty shoddy, really. You've been very kind to it.
It probably belonged to you, so I didn't want to be rude. So.
So there. Now, all sorts of things started to happen, and we do get very complicated now. Many, many new ideas for new materials were coming in. We had papier-mâché, we had Tunbridge ware, we had iron for pressed cast iron, thanks to the Prince Regent, or the King, who propelled its use in Brighton, Bath, all these wonderful canopies you find of cast iron. Became a great industry thanks to him. So many ideas had to be controlled. They had to control the patents. There's a design that you've never seen before. Nothing like that existed before. This is rosewood and carved, huge.
Stunning.
So when you turn it up, there's a little plate on the top there. And that shows a registration mark which began in 1842. There it is. Now that will tell you the day of the month of the year and the classification that the patent of that table was registered. And that lasted from the 1840s until the 1880s. And here is a good chart, is a guide which will tell you 1843, 1883, and that will tell you the month, the day of the year, when they changed around a bit. But you can buy these charts which will tell you. But that would everything, whatever the material, if you see that on a piece of silver, piece of porcelain, piece of glass, whatever, that stamp will tell you that will be the date that the patent was registered. And in 1883, they changed that. They did away with the diamond and they brought in patent registration number.
Okay.
Right? You've seen that.
When was that?
1883.
Okay.
That continued until 1914. So, now we have definite guides with everything as well. Very rarely do you see that on furniture, but it's interesting. Then we had needlework. But Berlin needlework, first introduced 1813 in silk patterns, which came from Berlin. The silk and the wool that they used was dyed in Gotha, and you bought a painting kit with needlework. It's just like you can today. And you had a picture which was printed, holes in it, and you took the right wool and the whatever. And gradually the wool took over from the silk. By 1830, 1840, these big panels were being made. And again, the more materials used, the later you can tell that it is. So this one has pure wool, nothing else. If you've got beads and glass in there, it'll be after 1840. But look at this, and then here again.
So the earlier works would be silk?
Sorry?
The earlier works were silk, so 18th
Yeah.
century into the 19th.
That's right, 1813 onwards. Okay. That was the first introduction. But of course, we call it Berlin needlework and Berlin woolwork, but needlework essentially is its correct title. It's quite good. They were usually allegorical scenes or religious scenes. They're not so popular, obviously, today, sadly.
Little fire screen to stop the makeup.
Yes.
Running off their face.
Well, we'd stopped using makeup from necessity in the 1740s, really. But it was then unbecoming to look flushed.
Okay.
So natural skin, but it should be pale. And so big screens came back again. Okay, look at these little flying buttresses. Again, a typical 1840 has to be just in the run-up to the Great Exhibition. Tunbridge ware. Tunbridge ware, little tiny pieces, great collectible. But not many people know how it's made. And actually what you're looking at there is the end of a stick of like Brighton rock made up of matches, little square or rectangular pieces of wood. You make up a pattern, you glue it all together, and then you slice it like that and stick it onto a piece of furniture.
Wow.
You're looking at the end of a cane. And these bands exactly the same. You'd have a band like that of this pattern coming through, slice it, cut it, stick it on. That's how Tunbridge ware was made.
Very clever.
So this is another new material.
So they'd make
similar
designs by just slicing them and then put them on and make 10, 20 of these at the same time.
Hundreds.
Okay.
Well, there you get a better idea, you see. Yeah. You can see all the little bits.
Well, good Tunbridge ware is worth a lot of money. It's very collectible now.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's another new material. Papier-mâché, tollware. The papier-mâché we can date by the fact that first introduced by Henry Clay in the 1790s. Jennens and Bettridge, as you know, took over and made the most money out of it. And by 1825, 1830, I think, a man called de Sutter put in mother of pearl. So after 1830, you'll have mother of pearl inlay.
I was lucky enough to be invited to go to Frogmore House. And they've got a whole room there which is just paper mache with mother of pearl. I mean, it's absolutely stunning. I mean, really is.
Yeah.
But that has gone out of fashion a little bit now as well.
Yes, it went out of fashion, came back again, like Baxter prints in the 1950s and paperweights. So many of these things that came in at this time went out of fashion and have yet to come back. Anyway, so there's papier-mâché, as I say, there's tollware, and papier-mâché. I brought this along to show you, actually. There you are. Just a little folder, just a simple little thing. But it's got lilies of the valley. Now that gives us another date, because they became fashionable in the 1860s and not before.
Really?
Really. So it has mother of pearl, little bits of mother of pearl. So we can date that any time after 1860 until about 1880, when the whole thing went out of fashion. Nobody wanted papier-mâché. What happens is that they've found various other ways of making it more cheaply, even to the extent they built a little village of it in Australia. Unfortunately, that didn't last the rain.
Couple of weeks of rain and that'll go, but yeah. We're called a marsh. Was it called a marsh afterwards? But anyway, we won't get into that now.
And so we had furniture. I mean, there are beds made out of it. Obviously, you find little tables. Mostly, we use little bits like that, work boxes and so forth, and caskets. But this introduction of all these new machines, new methods of production, new materials, new machinery. In 1847, Thomas Jordan patented a wood carving machine, and this changed the wood craft into industry. Okay. And the first time we had somebody who could actually carve with one motion and create four or five or six pieces of carved furniture at the same time. So that altered everything.
And then mass-produced furniture
Absolutely.
Came about.
And then we start next one with his carving machine, and we go into the Great Exhibition, which led to the import from all over the world of all sorts of things we'd never seen. And then we go through into Japanese and Egyptian taste, Art Nouveau, and of course we shall have to talk about Marsh, Morris and Faulkner's Limited, Excellent. William Morris,
yes,
and the carving factories.
Well, we'll do that on part 3 and 4 of John Bly's History of Furniture. John, thank you so much. It's been fascinating again, and I've learned so much, and I hope you have too. We'll see you on the next. We'll see you in the next instalment of Antiques Masterclass. Thank you very much.